it's Sarah here from BJC Health, coming to you from Sydney, Australia. Thanks for showing an interest in one of our educational events. You're about to watch part one, so enjoy the event. If you've got any questions about the content, then please consider joining BJC Connect, where you can access all of our facilitators live. Otherwise, please consider leaving a comment and we'll do our best to get back to you.
So today we're talking about fighting fatigue, and this is such an enormous topic, and it's so common. It's so common, particularly in our patients with rheumatic diseases. And, I was thinking about this a lot over the last week or so because I was writing this talk, and I realized that almost every patient, probably about 3/4 of the patients, were saying, my biggest problem at the moment is fatigue. And, when we really focus on it, we see what a major issue it is. So I think really worth talking about. And hopefully today we can sort of start to just validate it. It is real. It can be debilitating. We need to talk about it. And, hopefully we can give you some tools and strategies to start learning a little bit more about what fatigue is for you and what you can do about it. So when we say fatigue, what do we mean? We don't mean ordinary tiredness because, everybody's tired, but that's not what we mean. So we're talking about a feeling of extreme exhaustion that is not relieved by sleep, and it interrupts or stops you from doing your usual activities. So, people describe it as brain fog or having flat batteries. It's a bit like having batteries they've gone flat and they just can't charge back up again. You've probably got, if you've got fatigue, you've probably got your own way of, of explaining it or visualizing it. This is just the way that some people describe it. The normal things like, sleep or a favorite activity or pastime, they used to refresh you and they no longer do. People will often have sleep disturbance, and both mental and emotional tasks become tiring. It can be one of the most debilitating symptoms in people with rheumatic disease. What causes it? This is the big question. And so I'm going around this kind of circle because we often think that fatigue is just one thing. If the one thing could be fixed, the person wouldn't have fatigue. And let's start at the top with inflammation, because a lot of you will have some sort of inflammatory disease, and that certainly does cause a degree of fatigue. So the inflammation itself can cause a degree of fatigue. But let's look at all the other things that we need to consider. So sleep disturbance. So sleep disturbance can be a consequence of fatigue, but also just ordinary sleep disturbance. For example, some of you may have young children waking you up at night, or you may be someone with sleep apnea. There may be things totally unrelated to your condition that are keeping you up at night and making you more fatigued. Pain is a big one. So pain is exhausting, and I probably don't have to tell a lot of people here listening, but pain is a big one. And I've called the next one mental health, stress, and life. So, this is everything. So there's everything in life that needs to be controlled, considered, all the issues, all the things that are tiring you out add to fatigue. Now, I've just got to move. Sarah, can you see the on my screen the faces, or can you just see the actual screen?
I can see faces, like you mean.
Okay, I'm trying to get that away so I can. Anyway, don't worry about that. We'll ignore that. Okay, see, this is making me stressful, and this could add to my fatigue. Physical deconditioning. So when you have a condition, often, and even when there's nothing wrong with you, and you become deconditioned and your muscles aren't working properly and you're not moving as much as you used to, that in itself causes fatigue. Sometimes there are things like anemia or nutritional deficiencies, and maybe Monica will speak to that a little bit as well. Certainly some of the medications we prescribe will add to fatigue, and we really need to consider that. And, that can be hard to kind of dissect out, how much of the medication's contributing. Some people will have hormonal issues, for example, thyroid problems, or women around the time of menopause, that can add to it. We come to the biggie now, so infections. So we've always known that certain infections can cause fatigue, and there are some people that get chronic fatigue syndrome after certain viruses. But the big one at the moment is COVID. So it's really, really common to have prolonged fatigue after COVID. It's, probably at least 10%, up to 20% of people will have very long periods of fatigue, up to 3 to 6 months after COVID. Sometimes it's much shorter than that. But we really need to realise that that's more common in patients with rheumatic disease, more common in people that are being immunosuppressed. And so that is something that we, in this day and age now, we really need to consider when we're talking about fatigue. So my question to you is, what have I missed out? Can you think of other causes of fatigue? And if you can, put them in the chat box. I think, Sarah, you're going to be moderating that. Yeah. And, you may have think about some areas that I haven't considered. And I'm sorry, my computer's a bit. Oh, there we go. Good. Let's talk about fatigue and rheumatic disease. So it's a core symptom of many of the autoimmune diseases. So lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, just a very common core symptom. We know it's very, very prevalent. Also, conditions like some of you may have fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. Well, essentially, you have to have fatigue with those conditions. But even when you're on the best treatment for your arthritis, you may be on, the gold standard, most expensive, best treatment, and yet fatigue can still persist. And there is no specific medication that we can give that will always help fatigue. Certainly, we can think about changing some medications. There are some things we can do in terms of medications, but in general, we need to consider non-medication treatments. It's really, really important, because I wish we had the silver bullet, the magical treatment that could help everybody, but it actually doesn't exist. So we need to look at all the other fixable causes. So deconditioning, big one, and I think Sarah will speak to that, about how do you recondition or rehabilitate your body when you have some sort of arthritic or rheumatic disease, because it's not easy. Pain at night, disturbing sleep. Can we sort that out? Nutritional changes, stress, depression, coping with illness. These are all things that are potentially fixable or things that can be improved. Let's look at this. And if we start at the top and we think about, well, here's a person with rheumatic disease. And so there's like this cascade effect. So the rheumatic disease itself will often cause fatigue. Fatigue will often cause reduced activity because you just can't do the things that you were doing before. Maybe because of pain, maybe because of fatigue. And so in general, most people do start to reduce the levels of activity. They then become deconditioned. So your body is not doing the same things. Your muscles are not doing the same things. And that leads to what we call reduced function. So just not able to be functioning in the way that you were before. It might mean you can't do exercise. It may mean that you can't play with your grandkids in the same way that you used to. But basically, you're not able to do all the things that you would like to be doing. And what does that do? That feeds back, and that causes more fatigue. So we need to think about this in a really complex way. Okay, so I want you to meet Sally. Sally's a made-up person, so I'm not basing it on any of you, but I think that some of this is going to resonate with you. So let's imagine Sally. Sally is a 45-year-old woman, and she's got 3 kids. She works full-time, and she's recently been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. So she's very stressed about rheumatoid arthritis. What does it mean for her future? Obviously, this is a huge concern. Sally's someone who's otherwise been really well. So now she has a condition, and it's very stressful. Sally also just happens to have heavy periods. She doesn't eat much red meat. So of course we're wondering about whether she's getting enough nutrition. Does she have enough iron? And because of her condition, she's just not able to meal prep, and she's not able to prepare foods in the same way that she used to. So she's getting more takeaway, and she's having more processed foods. She's now often up at night. So she has some pain. Her kids are waking her. And when she has pain, it's really hard for her to get back to sleep. And we put her on the medications that are appropriate. But even then, she realizes that she's really had to stop all her usual activities, and she feels absolutely depleted and exhausted all the time. She has brain fog. She says she's trying to do exercise, but even small amounts of exercise leave her feeling really depleted. She's really not functioning well. She's had to start taking time off work. She's not able to do all the activities around her house, like preparing fresh food. She's starting to drop out of social activities. It's just too difficult. So the question is, how do we assess and how do we treat Sally's fatigue? And I think a lot of you are going to be thinking as I present this, you might not be a 45-year-old woman with children, but there will be aspects to it that I think will resonate. And I can say that because I'm hearing a similar story all day, every day. Right. So I know that this is how a lot of you are feeling. So let's try and break down the causes of Sally's fatigue. And this, of course, is really artificial, right? But just to give an idea of the things that might be contributing. So, it might be about a third of her fatigue could be put down to the inflammation, maybe less. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. But these are all the things: pain, iron deficiency, depression and stress, deconditioning, other. What's other? Work-life balance, all the stuff going on at work. Sally always says yes. Sally, can you make a cake for the cake store? Yes, I'll do that. Can you, whatever. She will always say yes. She doesn't know how to say no. She's got family demands. There's a lot of stuff going on for Sally. And so it's not just the one thing that is causing this degree of fatigue. We think about, well, how important is that inflammation in causing fatigue? It's really interesting because, we think that often that inflammation is the thing. It's all about the inflammation. But actually, there have been some really good studies of people with rheumatoid arthritis, and they try and work out, well, how important is the fatigue and is the inflammation, and how important is all the other stuff. So actually, fatigue and medications probably contribute less than what we think to the degree of fatigue. But there's a lot of indirect consequences of the condition. And this would be true of all the rheumatic conditions that we're talking about. So the sleep disturbance related to the condition, related to the anxiety around the condition, the reduction of physical activity, often gaining weight for all the reasons we've already discussed, steroids, medications, depression. So all those indirect consequences of having a rheumatic condition can cause a lot of fatigue. But what that means is that we really need to focus on those things when we're thinking about how to improve your fatigue. So the behavioral, the exercise, and sometimes dietary changes are going to often be more meaningful than the medications we use. So how do we help Sally? So of course, we have to offer her the best available treatment for her condition. That goes without saying. We have to manage her pain as best we can. We have to treat her iron deficiency. So this is, as a doctor, this is what I'm offering, but there's a whole lot more to it, right? So, often a psychologist can help give tools to manage stress, to deal with a new diagnosis, things like meditation, relaxation, and also there's a lot of online tools that can help with this. I'm going to be mentioning one of them in a minute, but there's a lot available to help with these things. Involving allied health professionals is really, really important, and exercise physiologists in particular have expertise in managing fatigue. And some of you here may have had the fortune of seeing Sarah, or one of our other exercise physiologists, and then I hear about it and I hear what an amazing improvement you have by involving Sarah or any of the other EPs. So what does that mean? We're going to be encouraging Sally to slow down, learn how to say no, to prioritize, and very importantly, and we're going to be talking about this a bit more, pacing the activities. And for some of you, that will be a new concept. For a lot of you, you're doing this every day. Delegating tasks, proactive learning and management of fatigue. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about one of the really good resources that I use, which is called the Cresta program. We're going to help her recondition, increase her activity, and that's got to be done slowly, gently, with, no judgment and with compassion, because Sally is really deconditioned. And if she does too much, and if she just joins the local gym and starts to work out, she's going to be in trouble. She's going to feel much worse. Her fatigue is going to get worse. And she's going to be, really not inspired to go back to exercise. And also we're going to offer nutritional support if it's appropriate. I wanted to mention this because this is one of the best free online resources for fatigue that I want to highlight. So lots of great YouTube videos, because what we're talking about here is the tip of the iceberg, right? We're just introducing concepts to you, but you really need to go much more deeply to understand what's going on in your body to cause the fatigue, what's going on with your hormones, things like the fight-flight response. And there's really a lot of learning to do. So these people present in a really accessible way. So there are videos, and there's an amazing PDF book. It's free, and I would highly recommend anyone who's struggling with this to read it. All right, so what I want to know is if you have fatigue, and I can see we've got 18 comments in the chat, so Sarah will be talking about those. But if you have fatigue, I want you to start getting curious about all the factors that may be contributing. Not just your medications, not just your disease. That's really, really important. But what are the other things that may potentially be more fixable that you can start to think about? For some of you with fatigue, I know you've been battling it for a long time and really have got great tools. You've really found treatments that have helped you. Maybe you can share some of them with the other people in this group. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Sarah, you're going to start to feedback some of that.
Yeah, I will. I'll pass on a few comments and ask a couple of questions. So one thing that came up, and maybe just use this as a chance to go through brain fog. So someone asked, Kat, how would you go about explaining, does fatigue cause brain fog, or does brain fog, is that part of fatigue? Like, how do you help some of your clients understand that?
It's a really good question, because we often use that interchangeably. And the way that I see it is that brain fog is one of the other sides of the coin to fatigue. They're the same thing. Right? Brain fog is more of a mental and cognitive symptom of fatigue. So, some people see fatigue as more of a physical fatigue, tiredness, exhaustion. I see brain fog as a cognitive thinking symptom of the same thing. So almost like mental fatigue, cognitive fatigue, just not being able to think straight, feeling blurred. Not a lot of my patients will come in, and it's really important they write everything down, because they know that they're not going to remember when they come in. And I just think it is one of the symptoms of fatigue. Some people get brain fog without fatigue. So, it's not, they don't necessarily go together. But when we're talking about people with profound fatigue, they almost always will describe brain fog as well.
Thanks. I thought this was a good question too. In your experience, have you found people with fatigue, that their fatigue can also manifest in physical ways? So this particular person mentioned feeling nauseous. So have you found that in the clients that you've...
It can, and I guess you could liken it to, everybody has the experience of just feeling, I don't know, so absolutely exhausted. So for example, when you have a baby and you're up all night with the baby, well, obviously that's not pathological fatigue, but that feeling of just feeling awful, nauseated, headachy. So for people with fatigue, they may feel that every day. So it's that feeling that you would normally get when you're not sleeping, or, you might get it. People who are well might get that for short periods, but that feeling, but feeling it every day, always, deeply. So yes, you can get, it might be gastrointestinal symptoms, nausea, constipation. So they're all part of the same issue.
Gotcha. And then final one, well, it's about sleep. So one person's asked, should they get a sleep study. So what have you guided clients if they know their sleep's poor, and when would a sleep study be something that you'd recommend? And then part B to that question is, someone's also asked, does it actually help to take naps, or what's your take on then just trying to get as much sleep as possible? And is that something that can be helpful?
Yeah, so for the first question, some people do have a sleep disorder. So some people do have something like obstructive sleep apnea. Some of you may have restless leg syndrome. So these are sleep disorders that are causing fatigue. Most people do not need a sleep study. So that's something as a doctor, when we're asking you about your sleep, it usually becomes quite apparent of whether there might be something that's a bit abnormal going on. For example, if you know that you are snoring, if you're maybe in a larger body and you know that you've got a lot of fat around here, and that can cause obstruction of your sleep. So there are, we can kind of tell from the symptoms by the shape of your neck, whether you're someone who's likely to have sleep apnea. So I don't think everybody has to have a sleep study. And I think that you either talk to your rheumatologist or your GP, who can then kind of help you, are you at risk of sleep apnea? And if you are, you go ahead and have a sleep study, because people often feel much better when they start using the CPAP machine, which is the treatment for sleep apnea. The second question was, I've forgotten.
That's okay. It's still
a bit of brain fog.
Yeah. Okay. So taking naps.
Really important question. So one of the most important things to know about fatigue is that actually the amount of sleep that you have at night doesn't necessarily help the fatigue. So a lot of my patients saying, I sleep 10 hours, 12 hours, and I wake up feeling shocking. Some people oversleep, they sleep too much. So the issue with fatigue is often not that there's been insufficient sleep. Sometimes there are issues about sleep quality. You're not sleeping, maybe you're having too much caffeine and the sleep quality is poor. But it's often you'll find that sleeping more and more is actually not going to improve the fatigue. Napping is a different question. So napping is all about that concept, which I know, Sarah, you're going to talk about pacing your energy levels throughout the day. And so it can be quite appropriate for people with abnormal levels of fatigue to have small naps during the day, particularly if they've had a lot on in the day, and they understand about pacing, they understand about how to distribute their energy levels over the day, and that's something that you need to learn, that it can be quite appropriate when there's been a lot going on and you've really used a lot of your energy and you're quite depleted, to have short naps. I think, Sarah, you'll probably talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, can do. Yeah, no, that's fine. And then I'll leave you with one question. You don't have to answer it now, but I was hoping someone would ask this, and this might be how we finish tonight, because you've already touched on so many important, good things. And someone's asked, where to start. So maybe as I'm talking, and Monica can have a chance to put, her take on it too. But yeah, if someone was hearing tonight and feeling fatigued and wanting to make one step in the right direction, what would your answer be? But you don't have to answer it yet.
All right, we'll talk about that after.
Yeah,
just
sounds good.
Remind you. I need to be reminded. Yes.
Yeah, no probs.
Okay.
No probs. All right, I'm just going to try and start sharing mine in a sec. Give me 2 seconds. But thanks for all your comments, everyone, as well. I know I haven't sort of addressed everything just yet, but hopefully we will. But I think, again, it's really nice to share some of your own personal experience with others attending tonight. And that can be, just as helpful as anything that we have to say. So thanks for those who are putting their experiences there. Okay. Sorry, just recalibrating. Go from the start, but I'll just get to my bit. Oh, sorry. You get a very quick recap of Ilana's slides. All the different stars are showing up on my, there we go. Okay. So as an exercise physiologist, I guess I have a love-hate relationship with my title, being an exercise physiologist. So it's yeah, it's definitely something that we can use when we're talking about helping people manage fatigue is exercise, but hopefully an exercise physiologist or another allied health professional can help you with more than just that structured idea of exercise, because as some of you have already shared, you might not be in a state to even consider that, or you might be able to understand the idea that exercise would be something good for you to do, but it's just not the right time. You don't feel up to it. So one of the things I try and cover is early on when I'm working with someone with fatigue is just this concept of pacing, or this boom and bust cycle. And although in this graph, they've used pain as, I guess, the peak of the curve, this could also be fatigue. So you go about your day, you're trying to eat well, you're trying to look after those that are close to you, you're trying to do the things that you want to do. And it's this real challenge, particularly when you have an inflammatory condition or a chronic illness, to find that sweet spot of not overdoing it and also not underdoing it. Because as you can see, if we overdo it, often we'll have a flare up. And so a flare up might be, a bout of fatigue. That means you're, really struggling to do anything during the day. It could be a flare in your pain. It could just be, feeling like you're not able to do any of the things that you want to do. And that can be very debilitating. And it makes sense, because that's a very negative, not very fun experience, that then you'll do less, or you'll be very wary, you'll be very conscious about not doing that again. And so then what we tend to see, especially if you're not quite on top of pacing your day to day, or it's a new concept for you, gradually your activity level goes down. And that's where it can be really tricky, because that deconditioning that Ilana was mentioning is much more likely to occur when you're not moving regularly. And it's tricky because when you're fatigued, when you're in pain, often moving and exercising is one of the last things you feel like doing. But it's an important thing to consider and start to work towards when you feel up to it. But pacing is a strategy that can help us not have this graph occur, or even if it's occurred, or you can look at that and go, that's probably me. I'm overdoing it. Then I stop and then I try again and I feel like I'm overdoing it. We want to try and help you break through that cycle. So you've just finished watching part 1 of one of our recent educational events. Hope you enjoyed the content. If you'd like to access part 2, then you need to sign up for BJC Connect. It's a free platform where you can access not just the recordings of past events, but also access a whole range of upcoming future events and access our team of facilitators live. All of the details that you need to join BJC Connect are now flashing up on your screen. Otherwise, like our stuff, subscribe if you'd like to see more information from BJC Health. Look forward to seeing you in an event soon.